Hello everyone, I'm Captain Logan. It's not Spawn year. It's day 28 of my comic review video day calendar, and this time I promised I'd go back to Marvel, so that's what I've done, and in so doing, I wound up back in the year 1993. Again. I don't know what it is with this year. I guess I cannot get away from it in not Spawn year. I guess I just have a lot of comics from that year in my collection, particularly Marvel stuff. I don't know how many we've done so far, at least 6 or 7. I should go back and count. But anyway, I chose this issue not because of 1993, but because it's one that I read maybe 15 years ago, back when I bought out my first big comic collection, which I've talked about before, and I was curious about it because I liked its Spider-Man counterpart, which I think of myself as kind of a fan of, although I don't know that material super well. I've read the first few volumes, if you look at it as trades anyway. I own that all in singles, and Dan and I have reviewed some of that together. We stopped after the first 2 or 3 trades worth because of some material that connected up to it that we needed to read that we were having a hard time getting our hands on back then. So maybe at some point I can sweet talk Dan into getting back to that stuff. I've thought about asking him if he wants to read more of Spider-Man 2099 by Peter David. But anyway, I was curious about this because of that. I'd read a couple of other 2099 things that were kind of interesting, and I hadn't really heard people talk about this very much. And that's probably because it's not the most memorable thing in the world. I thought it was pretty awful when I first read it, and really generic and hard to get into. It's X-Men 2099. We're going to take a look at just, of course, the first issue of this today. And I wanted to look at this again to see if maybe on a reread a lot of years later, I would appreciate it a little bit more. Maybe there's something here that I wasn't getting in the first place that makes it more worthwhile. And I'm going to say, marginally. Very often I'll go back to something that I haven't looked at in a lot of years, and either I will have disliked it in the first place and it will hold up better than I thought it would, or I will love it and I'll, like, Batman Hush or something, and then many years later, after more life experience and more reading experience, what have you, I'm a different person, and I go, oh, this does not hold up as well as I remembered. So it's very often one or the other. If I like it, I tend to not like it as well later on, and if I don't like it, I tend to really appreciate it more down the road. This is more of a middle-of-the-road kind of experience. That neither of those things, well, neither. I mean, I didn't like this, so liking it would be the expectation, and I mean, I guess I appreciated it a little more, but I still just found the characters pretty generic and the situation somewhat typical, and I felt like I had to give it even another read after the first time around. I found my mind wandering a little bit while I was trying to look at this. It didn't suck me in the way I would have liked, and once I knew what I was getting myself into, I started picking up things about it that did not grab me in the first place. So I will give it that. There's more going on here than I initially gave it credit for, and the first time I read this back in the early 2000s, I was having a hard time even just understanding what was happening in it. I think a lot of that was just because I didn't have much of an investment in it, not because the ideas are so complex and it's such an intricate sort of story that it was beyond me or something. That like a Grant Morrison kind of way. Sometimes, with his books. But it was more just, do I really care about these people? Do I really want to read this situation? This feels like a kind of a D-list sort of X-Men team, like a wannabe X-Force or X-Factor or something. Can I just go read, Chris Claremont X-Men or something? But again, maybe it's a little better than that. Maybe if I gave it a few more issues, I would, maybe we just have something of a clunky first issue that is struggling to introduce all of its characters in a satisfying and easy to digest kind of way, because that's tough, right? It's kind of the pilotitis problem with a lot of TV shows, particularly ones with large ensemble casts. How do you introduce all of these characters that are all equal protagonists to an audience where they'll know what's happening, they'll get who these characters are quick enough to care about them, and you're actually telling a story and not just giving a roll call. This struggles with that a little bit, but it's also, I think, doing an admirable job of at least trying to get around that some, and in not immediately giving you a sense of why some of these characters are here. It's not the roll call thing. They do show up in as natural a way as they possibly can, but then I guess the problem ends up being with, I'm trying to keep all these characters straight, and some of them just are not immediately interesting to me. So I'm like, okay, file this person away. I guess I have to care, but like I don't yet. So like I said, it's a tall order, and part of the difficulty with it too is that it's not present day. It's a wild, like semi-dystopian future. And if you've been reading Spider-Man 2099, you might be already acquainted enough with this world that it's not as difficult to, get your feet in it. But especially if you haven't read that or you haven't looked at it in a while, and this is the only 2099 thing you're looking at, you have to be introduced to a whole new world on top of a very large cast of characters, many of whom are not especially likable right away. And it's in a world where a lot of people are not likable, and people are, the people on top are treating the people on the bottom as less than human, and so people have, by and large, kind of lost their humanity, at least a lot of them to some degree. It's a little bit of that RoboCop thing, but without the fun satire aspect of it. And so I would not recommend this as the first thing to look at in 2099. That would, of course, be Peter David's Spider-Man. But there is some worthwhile stuff here, and I'll talk about it. So this is written by John Francis Moore, who did a lot of DC and Marvel stuff in the early and mid-90s. He did in a lot of X books. It's funny, I said that this reads like a kind of poor man's X-Force or X-Factor. He actually wrote a lot of both X-Force and X-Factor, it turns out. He also did some of Doom 2099, which was something of a fan favorite for 2099. I think folks liked that book quite a bit, and so I think there is some talent here. I have also read some of the Batman women books that he wrote in the early 90s. He did some Bat Family stuff like Birds of Prey and Catwoman. He had a run on that book. But he wrote all of these, so he is the Peter David for X-Men 2099. He did the entire series. And I'll tell you how much of not a fan favorite book this was, how much people really didn't care. It did run 35 issues, but it didn't ever come back. And, I mean, when there was an attempt at kind of revamping, rebooting X-Men, 2099 at large in, I think, like the mid to late 2000s, these characters were there, but then as we've gotten more 2099 stuff much later on, we have not seen an X-Men 2099 title like we did with Spider-Man, which, if this was popular, I think you probably would have seen that. And then this is drawn by Ron Lim, who did mostly cosmic Marvel books, and kind of an interesting choice to have him here. And I think he was the main artist for this book. Let me see how much of this he actually did. X-Men 2099, 1 through 31. So he leaves right at the end for some reason and doesn't pencil the last few issues, unless I'm wrong about this issue count. No, 35. So for some reason, he doesn't draw the last 4 issues. I don't know why that is. But if you're not familiar with Ron Lim, he drew the latter half, I think, of Infinity Gauntlet, finishing up for George Perez, who left that series, and he was kind of aping George Perez a little bit, and then he drew some of the other Infinity books after that, and he also was the regular artist for a book that we've already done an issue for on this show just a few days ago. which was the third volume of Silver Surfer. And weirdly, we just missed him. We ended up with a fill-in artist that day when I did that Nova issue of Silver Surfer that I really liked, and I thought that artist was pretty good. Lim, I think is, I don't want to say phoning it in here, but I'm not liking his art as well as I have on some other things. I feel like he's doing the real typical, I don't know why I'm just thumbing through the issue when I could, show it to you. But I feel like he is trying maybe too hard to make this look like a standard 90s X-Men book. It's almost like he's trying to ape Jim Lee as much, or maybe Liefeld, or maybe a kind of a combination of both. This art is okay. He can be a lot more detailed than this in other things, and there's nothing about this that really immediately grabs me and makes me, excited to keep going with this book. But the setup here is, again, a somewhat dystopian future where corporations mostly kind of rule the land, and a lot of this takes place in a city that seems like it's basically owned and run and operated by one guy who has casinos and who has the power to basically be judge, jury, and executioner and decide who lives and who dies. And he has a casino. His name is Singe, and I guess the city's name is Singe. And he's like 90 years old, and his children run his businesses for him or with him. It's hard to tell because something horrible happens to him and he turns into like a zombie-looking guy very quickly. I don't yet know what is happening here. I would have to read on to get this whole thing. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But at his casino, people can wager anything they want to, including their lives, and I don't really fully understand the situation, how this happens, but we have a mutant who will clearly be one of the mainstays of this team, whose name is Bloodhawk, and he's really the only character that I remembered from this cover and just from this team and the look of this. If anything stands out at all, it's this guy. He's got kind of a gargoyle sort of look about him. And anyway, before you get his full gargoyle look, because his powers are suppressed before this, and so he doesn't actually have his full-on look, he is basically about to be publicly executed, and there's like a slot machine that chooses his fate, which is real messed up and kind of fun in a twisted way. And so he is going to die. I don't know what exactly he's done except for just being a mutant. Maybe that's enough in this world. I'm not totally sure. There's going to be a whole lot of, I don't fully understand why some of these things are happening. But anyway, that's our introduction to this guy. This is not the first thing that happens, but I wanted to set up kind of the threat and the oppressive force here, because our Xavier-type character, whose name is either Zion or Zion, and I'm going to assume it's Zion because that is the more on-the-nose kind of name, so I'm sure that's what it's supposed to be, but it's spelled like Zion, and Zion, like a safe haven, like the like a heaven, like a perfect almost utopia. And he is basically a full-on combination of Xavier and Magneto, which is a real interesting idea. He is much more of a revolutionary than Xavier, but he also has that kind of compassion and doesn't just care about mutants. So he seems like he has a speech toward the end of this where he says that he and his people have learned how to live together from the teachings of Xavier, but how to fight through the teachings of Magnus, of Magneto. And he seems like a like a self-help guru type guy, and he is putting together this kind of separate underground civilization of misfits, and some of them are mutants, but not all of them, and they have a common cause, so they really have learned to, at least these people, they really have learned how to come together despite their differences and use their differences as a strength, because they have a common enemy. Because this is much more of a haves and have-nots kind of society. So the oppressive kind of big corporate moguls are oppressing people, not just based on, whether they're like them genetically, and some of that is in there. It seems like most mutants are treated as lesser, but also just a lot of regular people, where you have a huge disparity between white collar and blue collar, and the very fascist government types who I can't tell if there even is really, or I meant to say business types, because I can't tell if there really is even a government in this world. It seems almost like business and government are the same thing, which is sometimes something that, particularly in the mid to late 20th century, will do in science fiction, where those two things come to bed together. You can't tell where one begins and one ends, and it's a commentary on where we've been in United States society especially, and where that could all lead to, what the culmination of that could be if we got too corrupt. And you could argue that too much of this might be even happening now, and that we're already living in that future to some degree, I suppose. But anyway, so the idea is we can put aside our differences. The humans and mutants that have been looked down on by the people on top don't have any reason to fight amongst themselves, because because both of them have the same plight, the same problem. And so he is Martin Luther King and Malcolm X kind of simultaneously, which is the most interesting thing in it, and I kind of just want to focus on that guy. But anyway, he gets almost assassinated at the end of this, because he is blamed for what happens to the head of the city. I'm trying to remember his name now. I said it a minute ago. It's see, everything is coming out of my brain with this already. It's Singe. Yes, Singe. And the scene, let me backtrack for a second. So, like I said, he gets turned into like a zombie-looking guy, and like I don't even know if his wits are still about him and how he's operating at that point. I don't know how it happened to him. So Zion shows up to him and says, "You got to stop this human trafficking nonsense." And Singe says, "I'm gonna sell any people I want to, because I run everything and I can do what I want, and I'm a soulless, horrible person." And we get a reveal that Zion's power seems to be being able to disintegrate things by touching them. And I like the idea that this guy who's trying to build something, his main power is destruction, and that he has to, and I think there's maybe a metaphor there, that he, now that I'm thinking about it, that he has to find this middle place between destruction and in building something, destruction and salvation. So with Magneto and Xavier, you had kind of two extremes of that, where you had one character that was all about building bridges, and yet another that was about demolishing them. Of course, to replace it with something else, but I think this guy is certainly, I would imagine he would want to tear down the system, but he seems less extreme about that than Magneto. And he's got more of kind of a Zen thing going on with him, but he certainly, can have a temper too, as we see here, where he disintegrates this wall. But that's all we see him disintegrate. We don't see him do anything to Singe. So later on, Singe shows up to his horrible, sadistic children, and he's got this crazy zombie face, and his kids decide that it must be Zion who did it. So they go to Zion's secret fortress, where his new group of people have all gathered there, the thing called The Gathering, and he gives this big stirring speech, and then luckily he has enough time to finish his speech, and then he gets attacked and almost killed, but this character that we're introduced to at the beginning of this, who is going to join and I guess become the leader of this team. I got spoiled a little bit in doing a tiny bit of research for this, but his name is Timothy Fitzgerald. That's Skullfire, and at the beginning of this, he tries to lie and say that he's not even a mutant, but he gets invited to this gathering, and so presumably because he's a mutant, and we'll find out at the end that that's true, that he's brought there by one of the female X-Men. Is it Crystalline, or is it it's not Serpentina, because she meets him in the first place. Anyway, kind of the right-hand man, whichever one it is, because I don't have these characters straight yet. The right-hand man or woman, I should say, of Zion, kind of handpicks some people to come and be on this team and be part of this new underground civilization and society. And anyway, we at the beginning don't know what his power is, and then at the end it's revealed that he's got this kind of Blight-esque look, Blight from Batman Beyond, which of course is much later than this, or a few years later than this, but he is able to do this energy thing where his whole body glows and then he can shoot beams out. It must be some radiation thing, and anyway, he ends up saving Zion, who does get shot, but he ends up living, and at the end, the big reveal is he's trying to put together a team of X-Men, and he's calling them X-Men, which, we can kind of put that together already, but that's a big deal to Skullfire. And you have some other characters here that I, again, don't have a full beat on yet, but I get the sense that Junk Pile, who we meet at the very beginning, he looks and sounds like a Transformer, and I get the sense that he's probably going to go against the team very quickly and not actually be a main member of this group. It seems like he's probably going to double-cross them. You have this other guy, let's see, Mean Streak, who I think has speed powers, maybe, I'm not sure. And then you have this guy that has kind of an interesting power that's a lot like Colossus. And you'd think at least one of these characters would be related to an original X-Man, maybe, but they didn't go there, or if they have, it's not revealed yet. I don't know. I guess maybe so. But you have this Colossus-like guy that you see here, who has the ability to touch any metal and then turn his body into that metal. So it's even going farther than Colossus. And he has a line here where he says that he's made of adamantium. And I don't know if it was just adamantium laying around and he touches it and then he turns into that, or if he defaults to adamantium. I'm not really sure what's going on there, but he has at least kind of a cool power. And then I should also mention that Zion, unlike Xavier, actually has a mutant, like a superhero X-Men name, which is Desert Ghost. He's not the Day Ghost, he's the Desert Ghost. And I think I might finally look at a little bit more of this after reading this, because the situation in it being more of a social revolution than just a group that people don't understand, or another species of humanity, if you like, going up against bigots is cool. Like, I like that it's, updated in that way, and that it's recognizing, like how much worse, if society was this much worse, what people's priorities would probably be. And so it is telling a different story, which I really appreciate. One thing that was really weird looking at this in a single issue, I have to mention, is it looks like an oversized comic. You think you're looking at 28, 29 pages, and it's actually numbered that way, but it numbers all the pages in the middle too that have nothing to do with this comic. And I'm not going to talk too much about this stuff because it's not part of the actual story, and because there's not enough here to go on, which is part of the problem. But you get to the middle of this, and you have a big ad for $20.99, a big landscape ad. It's enter the world of $20.99. Oh, okay. You're probably just telling me that after I read this, there are other $20.99 comics that I might like to look at and take a look at other things in this continuity. And then you flip the page, and suddenly I'm reading completely out of context 2 pages of Spider-Man $20.99. And I'm like, what does this have to do with what I'm reading right now? Oh, I guess this is an ad? Maybe? Okay. And you look at the border, and the sense I get is that just the fact that that's in a border is supposed to be enough to tell you that you're still looking at an ad. But there's nothing about this landscape full-page ad by itself that connects up to that tells you that that's still what you're looking at. So there's no instruction. If this came out in the 70s, there'd be an instruction that would be like, skip past these pages to continue the book. We're in the middle of a scene. You get to the bottom of this, and you're looking at Bloodhawk, who's just been made out with by this evil female henchman who just likes the idea that this guy will be thinking about her when he goes to his demise. She's real sadistic and screwed up. And you get to the bottom of this, and you're still in the middle of a scene of dialogue. Somebody has said a thing that someone else is going to respond to after you look at like 10 pages of ads. So it's Spider-Man 29, 2 pages, totally out of context, that there's no reason to read because you don't know what's going on. It's just the middle of an action scene. It would be better if this was just a pinup or something to say, this is Spider-Man 2099. He is really cool looking. You should read his stuff. But no, it's like in scene, taken right out of a book. And look, I've seen this kind of thing done even all the way up to recently, to a few years ago when I was still reading Current, where you'd have backup features that were actually just the first few, not actually a backup, just the first few pages of a comic that just came out or is just about to come out, trying to entice you to read it. That's cool. That's fine. But why put it right in the middle, and why not have it be actually the first couple of pages of a comic? And I get the sense that they must have put these in the middle of several of these, partly because one of these is X-Men, and I'll get to that. Here's Ravage 2099. Ravage, which I have had in my possession a bunch of times because nobody kept that book, and every time I bought a collection, I would wind up with Ravage. It's also weird that Ravage, by the way, is called Ravage 2099 because there's no regular person Ravage, but, we got to keep the branding. We got to hang on to the synergy. And then we've got a couple of pages from Doom 2099, and it just keeps going. It's all of the books in their line, I guess. Now there's a pinup for X-Men 2099. Okay, that's fine. If I turned the page and there was a pinup, I might be a little confused for a second because it looks like it could still be internal art that's part of the story I'm reading, but I would pretty quickly figure out what this is. I'd put it at the back instead of the middle, but if that's all it was, whatever. You flip the page, and it's still going. You're still getting a 2-page bit of a scene with no context, and guess what? It's from 2099. Presumably from an issue that we haven't read yet. So then, I'm thinking, okay, maybe this is part of the book that... This is all jumbled up and weird. I'm like, this is a mess. I'm like, okay, this is actually X-Men 2099, and these are pages I've not seen yet. Surely they wouldn't throw pages in that would spoil things for me, right? So I start reading it, because I'm thinking maybe it's part of... Even though it's got the border, I'm not sure. I'm like, Maybe it's part of the comic. So I start reading it, and it must be from the next issue, because it's not reproduced at the end of this in the actual story, and it's revealing things, it's spoiling stuff that happens in this issue. It's talking about how Zion has survived the attack. We don't even know about the attack yet. That hasn't happened. Why would you put that in the middle of this? Why would you do that? And then you turn the page, and it's Punisher 2099. And then you turn that page, and it's Hulk 2099. This is insanity. This is like some of the worst advertising I've ever seen in the middle of a comic book. Put all that crap at the end. Why are you doing that? And then you turn the page, and you're back to the scene that you were reading before. So, like, if I knew, it wouldn't be that big of a deal. I could just flip all that and then get to this, but I didn't know what I was looking at. It was hard to tell in the first place that was an ad. So, yeah, that's obnoxious. I hate that. I like this, as I said, marginally better than I did the first time I read it, and I might finally take a look at a little bit more of this, mostly just because the idea of Zion and the kind of revolution he's trying to build is interesting. I like that he's more of a realist than both Xavier and Magneto, where, in his way, he is still idealistic, but he lives more he's a little bit more grounded, or maybe he just, like, this is kind of interesting. Maybe in a world this cynical, this is the closest to super hopeful, idealistic anybody could possibly hope for. Anyway, I'm already at half an hour. I'm going to get going. Thanks a lot for watching, folks, and hope you enjoyed today's episode, and I'll be back with you again tomorrow for another one. Don't know what I'm going to review yet. You'll just have to come back and find out with me. I am Captain Logan, and happy reading, folks.